Soul Sparks, where deep truths ignite conscious transformation. I'm your host, Saima, and today's guest, Aaron Scott, is a former Wall Street hedge fund founder turned consciousness disruptor. From high finance to higher awareness, Aaron now unravels the illusions baked into modern systems economic, medical, religious, and beyond and reveals how they shape the very way we see ourselves. Through the Evolved podcast and his upcoming book, The Architecture of Awakening, he is helping people pierce the veil, dismantle false identities, and re enter life with radical clarity. So, if you have ever felt that yourself doesn't quite belong in the world you have been handed, you're about to find out why. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's
I'm
my
very excited to be here.
Mhm. So am I. It's my pleasure to have you here, Aaron. So, Aaron, you have lived inside some of the most systemized structures, Wall Street, hedge funds. I'm really curious to know that what first made you question the identity those systems gave you.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's interesting. I've sort of always had a feeling, if you will, an intuition with respect to at least the structure of the Western lifestyle society, if you will. And kind of prior to entering high finance, Wall Street, etc., I was really conscious of sort of the sacrifices that I had to make within myself, and not even just
Mhm.
sacrifices, but the need to really shut off an entire part of who I am and kind of who we all are. And so it's really it's been sort of an interesting journey for me because I have a perspective coming from a place of sort of full consciousness throughout my entire career, and I really feel it's kind of like an obligation, if you will, and I feel kind of duty driven to discuss a lot of these systemic issues that exist in the modern day society. And again, to your introduction point, really kind of discussing with your listeners that in truth, their feeling of displacement or misplacement is not their fault. It's really a symptom or byproduct of the this sort of society and structure thereof that we've been handed.
Mhm. That such an honest reflection, Aaron, and it's not easy to pause and challenge the very identity that's been shaped by such high stakes environments. And I really appreciate you sharing that perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that I would say one of my sort of my desire, and I discuss this in my podcast. Presently, it's called the Evolved Podcast with Aaron Scott. It's a podcast that really kind of reveals truth and knowledge that in many ways has been obfuscated or hidden about modern day systems, about modern day approaches to understanding identity. And really, it's an effort to give people, again, I believe that with truth and knowledge and heightened perspective or different perspective, people, it's sort of like the building block for people to, again, shape a worldview and to shape a more sincere understanding of who they are. I think that a big problem that we face in today's modern world is, we have a kind of fractured truth apparatus where people are given so much information, but don't know up from down, light from dark, etc. So I really do a deep dive on a number of important issues, ranging from artificial intelligence to central banking policy to even kind of ideas of consciousness and of matrices that we all inhabit, and how to find our true place within those systems. And I've kind of taken that effort a step further with my upcoming book. Hopefully, it'll be coming out in a few months, The Architecture of Awakening, where I not only sort of unveil these systems, but I do so in a really sort of anchored approach and in a way that gives people, again, perspective on who they are and their environment, but also tools for awakening within that environment. Because it's one thing to say, look, this is the world, this is how it is, go fend for yourself. This is really about, again, providing a framework and a path, if you will, for living awakened in a world that is, for the most part, asleep, right? So this was really a conscious effort for me in this book to, remove stigma, to mainstream ideas of consciousness and the present predicaments that we face in experiencing a wholeness with ourselves. And again, discussing the systemization, the institutionalization of a lot of our sacred understandings, and of understanding ourselves from, again, a wholeness perspective.
That makes so much sense, Aaron. So, like, in your view, how do institutions like education, religion, and healthcare program our sense of self?
Yeah, sure. So I think with a lot of this stuff, especially Western systems, you have to really go to the origin story. You have to go back and see, who the founders were, who the architects were of these systems, and what their aim was, and whose interests were served, right? And what you'll find, first and foremost, is that a lot of these systems that were founded, centuries ago, in some cases, millennia ago, um, first of all, still persist in their original form, in many ways reshaped, but nonetheless, the aim is still intact, and the impact, with respect to ideology, with respect to understanding the self, is, again, fully intact. So it's really about, again, bringing awareness to what has shaped our society, and in return, or as a result, what has shaped human consciousness, right? The human consciousness that we all have. And again, when the individual is shaped, what happens is that it bleeds slowly, but nonetheless it does into the collective consciousness of the globe and of the world around us. So, to kind of dive into some details, for example, in the United States, if we look at the education system, and we look at who the founders were, and what the tenets were, or what the tenets were, you have a kind of full blown, out in the open formation of an indoctrination camp, I call it, by industrial capitalists, or industrialists at the turn of the 20th century, guys like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and they quite literally constructed the American education system after the Prussian model. And the Prussian model, if you're familiar with it, was essentially to create docile, compliant workers who served, ends, and really for industrial needs, and for bureaucratic needs. There were statements made by, spokesmen representing these guys, this guy named Gates, who said out in the open, we're not looking to effectively, nourish, we're not looking to create creative thinkers or people who question. We are, they say something like, we're not looking to create philosophers or doctors, or men of letters. We're looking to create workers. Now, granted, there have been developments, especially with higher education, where this sort of break off takes place. But one cannot ignore the fact that the actual framework for learning, from a young child starting in kindergarten through high school here, is still the exact framework where you go into a class, you sit down, you're fed information for you to memorize, not question. You are assessed, and you are assessed based on grades, based on the construct of right versus wrong, passing versus failing. It is a performative structure where your value is derived from performance. Now, in truth, in the real world, or in the actual construct of the human being, this is in complete opposition to what it should be. Because in the real world, successful people, or at least in my opinion, whole people, are creative, are touching on intuition, are looking for an expanded understanding of themselves and the world around them. Um, these are There's also the idea of the passing, failing. Well, guess what? Failing isn't really failing. Failing is learning, if it's looked at under the right lens. And in truth, it's really all about failing. it's all about taking chances and looking for different ways to, ascend past the quote unquote failed attempt, right? So again, you have this whole framework, which in many ways is just completely backwards. And it's not by accident. It's because this was the conscious structure of individuals looking to serve their interests. Remember, these guys were monopolists. They owned industries. They owned the entire oil and gas industry, the railroad industry, the steel industry. So in essence, they were self-serving, and they were looking to shape the consciousness and an ideology from a very young age. This was again an overt structure that is well documented, however, not well known. So I can kind of keep going if you'd like into other systems, but that's just one sort of acute example of what frameworks look like and how people are just completely unaware. Now I'll ask a question to you. As a human being, if you are raised within that sort of indoctrination, wouldn't you want to know, right, what the foundational structure was? Wouldn't you then take that information and question, right, your inherent, your inherent belief systems or your inherited belief systems, and maybe stop and think, wait a minute, this is interesting because I kind of feel that at my core. I sense that, at least with respect to the way that I think about myself. I value myself based on my performance, based on the money that I make, based on the job that I have, based on my status, based on my title, right? Isn't that really isn't that really present in the way that I understand myself and the world around me? So again, one example, I can go into others, but I think that should resonate with your listeners.
You, that's really powerful, Aaron. It's not, I mean, that's really a profound point which you gave, like going back to the origin story really does reveal that how deeply these patterns are woven into us, often without us even realizing. And I really love that you brought it back to that foundational level. And
Yeah, and look,
you get
thank you. But yeah, and I think that again, as these systems evolve, if you will, for lack of a better word, because I don't think that they're evolving at all. I think that they are metastasizing in many ways. But you see the same pattern repeat itself with really all endeavor, and things have really gotten out of control when you look at sort of the globalist capitalist model, or really the globalist agenda in general, where you have multinational corporations that are dictating, quite literally sovereign policy in countries. Um, you have frameworks that place capital above everything else. And in the globalist model, in truth, the essence of that model is really all about placing capital above everything else, above the countries that are, the people within the countries that are a part of the system, individuals themselves, human beings themselves. It's really capital rules all, and this framework is just a evolved form, a highly evolved form of this same sort of material based, performative based, efficiency, uh, profit at all costs mentality, right? It's just at an sort of an exponential scale. And you run into real problems when, again, people are going through life unconscious to these topics and to the literal framework and foundation of society and of economy. And it's really where we are today. And we're seeing, through technocracy, even with the development of AI, we're not developing AI to enhance human consciousness or to even exist in unison with the human, right? These aims, this development is really a function of creating efficiency, creating more revenue, more power to governments, with the human completely out of mind. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? Again, this is all about this is about the consciousness behind the system, the consciousness behind the effort, the consciousness behind the the corporation. And again, people think that these systems are sort of divine, but in truth, they are derived from human beings. We sculpt them, we shape them, and we can change them. And we can make AI work on a, work to enhance um, local markets. We can use AI to foster regenerative based economies. We can use AI to enhance our relationship with nature and the world to preserve to preserve the biodiversity and to um, in real form prevent mass pollution, right? So it's about the consciousness behind the systems and behind these global efforts. And what you're seeing again are just back to AI. You're seeing AI being just sort of perpetrating and pushing this mindset to an insane scale, right? So if we used AI again to enhance the human experience, to allow us to touch higher levels of consciousness, to allow us to understand our place in the universe better and to coexist, because in truth we're creating another form of consciousness. It's a soulless consciousness, but it's a consciousness that will exist with us. So to take a step back, it's really about our ability, and this is really part of my sort of effort. It's really about our ability to re-understand uh, all of these mechanisms at play here, and to hopefully allow people to get creative and rethink how they're living their lives when they understand the origin and the true function of how again these machines, if you will, evolve.
Uh, Now, in your book, The Architecture of Awakening, you offer a new path to identity. I'm really, curious to know actually that what does rebuilding yourself outside of the systems look like, practically and spiritually?
Yeah, sure. So it's I kind of break the book up as I start off with sort of the illusion of separation, where we literally live in this world and we think that we're separate from everything else, which is a massive veil, right? In truth, we are not separate from everybody else. We're not separate from the world. We're not separate from nature. We're not, we don't live in nature. We are nature, right? We do not live separate from people. Our entire, we have mirror neurons in our brain that connect us to other people. When somebody winces, we experience it. When we watch somebody going through something painful, we feel it, right? So this is a direct connection with somebody else. We have entire uh, even just kind of like the way that we breathe in oxygen that comes from plants and trees. We give back carbon dioxide to trees. So there's this whole ecosystem that we've been cut off from, and that has in my belief, this is not necessarily a a creation by kind of like a sinister group of people. Certainly they operate on the people who are in control and are using their control for sinister, if you will, means. Um, do so more on kind of a power and money scale, right? But it's the systems themselves that we are unconscious of that further perpetrate this disconnection. And I talk about how, I talk about the institutionalization, how the sacred became institutionalized. We went from mystics. Mystics became priests, and then priests became intermediaries between ourselves and the divine, right? We are in truth directly connected to the divine. It exists within us. We are the divine. We are the universe experiencing itself in our unique form. But in truth, we are entirely, effectively, a universe, right? As above, so below. We are just a unique version of that universe experiencing itself, right? And it's really interesting how you see these systems evolve and how they mirror one another. Again, after the institutionalization of sort of the divine, that bled into the institutionalization of these systems, of these sacred systems, education, medicine, right? And then it's really about it's really about kind of like the next step, and this is really where it gets important. It's about awakening within these systems, recognizing them for what they are, and then dissecting what that awakening process looks like. And I go into kind of the idea of truth and knowledge and the right perspective, and why there is an inherent fear and not just with awakening, but with many things where you peel back the where you pull back the veil, and why truth inherently feels unsafe. And it's not just with it's really just with new things. Neurologically, people are not people don't like change. They like the loops that they live in, right? So even and people
Mhm.
live their whole lives gravitating towards it in a way of sort of sick comfort, even, really acute, painful experiences. But because they're used to those painful experiences, they go back to them in sort of a default way, right? So it's about giving, again, empowering people and using truth as a tool of awakening, and explaining, why truth feels unsafe, right? It threatens, survival strategies. It calls into question the reality that we've been trained to accept, right? So it's about kind of, again, recognizing the truth and then accepting the truth. The truth is destabilizing. It creates schisms that aren't necessarily what you think they are, right? And it talks about, my book talks about, I provide tools and insights to sort of navigating liminal space between I call it systematic entrapment and inner awakening, without abandoning yourself. So it's really not about detaching from the world and living, in the woods somewhere. It's about, um, accepting yourself for who you are, uh, and embracing who you are, and then providing a path to experience your whole self, but still recognizing the deception and the veils and the unconsciousness of the world around them. And I go into kind of reframing your identity, right? When you have this performance-based identity, when your identity is derived from what you do, not who you are in essence, not, where people have jobs where it's a means to an end, not because they inherently value those jobs, right? And it's about guiding people back to a place of safety where they can be true to themselves in their daily life. And a big topic that I go into is sort of the paradox that exists, right? Where we are really the wave and the ocean, right? We're not one or the other. We again, this is the idea that we are the universe, right? We are not just the fragment. We are not just the fragment. We are the field, right? It's about living within that tension. It's about embracing that tension and the beauty of that tension, and how to be sovereign without forgetting our collective interbeing, right? So that I hope that's not, I hope that's kind of what you're looking for, but
Mhm.
it's about again, providing people with an awakened perspective, and using things like your nervous system and understanding parallel structures and things like that, where, again, people can look at themselves differently, reframe their identity, and live a more enriched, whole life with truth and real meaning and purpose.
Mhm. Oh, Aaron, you have given us so many beautiful reminders, like embracing who we are, and we are not separate from nature, but an expression of it. And like seeing ourselves that way really shifts the whole idea of rebuilding. It feels like constructing something new and more like returning to what's already true.
That's right, and that has always been true, right? And when you look at, in many ways, when you really look at what, sort of the pervasive cancer of society, it's really about keeping people distracted, and not even necessarily, again, not like in a puppeteer fashion, a conscious, sinister way, but in a sort of an unconscious way, right? These structures have unconsciously created these schisms, have unconsciously detached us from ourselves. They've made us think of ourselves as solely material beings. And it's really funny because, I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny. But when you look at, ancient teachings, ancient knowledge, there was a full understanding not only of themselves, but of our relationship to the universe. And people think that because we've removed spirituality from our understanding of ourselves, we've somehow evolved. But in truth, we haven't. We've devolved. And you don't need to listen to me. Just look at health statistics around the world. Look at the amount of depression, anxiety, disorders that are directly derived from this material based understanding of themselves, where they go to work for half their waking hours and they rinse repeat and they're basically like they have this sort of robotic um life, and they don't question it. It's just the way it is. It's what everybody else is doing. But in truth, that's not a natural way of being. And we are not, again, evolving by cutting ourselves off from the spiritual side, from the divine. It's a complete misunderstanding. And when you have social media and advertisements pushing, identity through consumption, identity through material goods, it's only further perpetrating this illusion. And it's incumbent upon all of us, just as stewards of humanity, right? We have such a short time on this planet. It's and to completely discard an entire part of you, a whole half of you, if you will, is not the right way to live. It is a it is an illusory way of living your life, but people are not aware of it. So it's again, it's so I believe that I'm on kind of a mission in helping individuals and maybe even humankind as a whole to get a grasp on what's going on, right? What's and who they are, because people just don't know on a mass scale.
Absolutely, that I could not agree more, Aaron. Yes. So, identity isn't static, it's shaped, distorted, and too often misunderstood. But as Aaron showed us that there's a way to unlock from the programming and return to truth. Not the truth handed to us, but the one uncovered through brave, critical seeing. So, listeners, take this conversation as a permission slip to question more, feel deeper, and rebuild your soul's architecture with intention. Your awakening won't look like anyone's else, and that's exactly.